Thank you so much, and let's give a big round of applause for Heidi.
Just gonna hobble my way over here. This is exciting. There we go.
So
Yes.
I don't know if Mike told you they close here at 8.
Yes. I should be well under time, assuming it all goes well. So hi, my name is Heidi. On the promotional info, it said that, I'm Heidi Trudell, and I'm tired of picking up dead birds, and that is why I'm here. Essentially, I used to be a bird watcher. I do like live birds. My entire background is birds of pick a flavor, any flavor, live, dead, endangered, captive, wild, like just anything with birds. And in 2003, I went to a college that had big, shiny windows. And I kept trying to move away from that, tried switching careers. I've worked at libraries and I've worked at zoos and everything, but like there's just windows everywhere. And you can't unlearn this. So this presentation is kind of a combination of what has happened in the past, what's kind of going on now, which is absolute chaos and brilliance, and what's coming up next in the bird collision world. And I'm assuming you're all familiar with this terrible, are you a human method of confirming, are you a human? Where can birds fly? This is a great example if you're looking at a building and trying to figure out, will birds hit it? The short answer is probably yes, unless every single square has a lot of stuff going on. But I digress. So glass gets a really bad rap because, well, birds get a really bad rap. Everyone's blaming birds for hitting glass because we can see it. Why can't they see it? But we haven't actually been able to see glass for very long at all. Well, we've been able to see it for a very long time, but then we switched gears entirely. Essentially, glass is a building material that, until very recently, was entirely modeled, marbled. It was just melted sand and very imperfect. So while we understand steel and concrete and other structural materials, glass was a very small scale material. And it wasn't until 1959 that float glass suddenly arrived on the scene and we could get absolutely gorgeous surface finishes. So on the left, we don't actually know what this building is across the street from, except down in that right-hand corner, you can see that there's like an archway that's being reflected. That's a new piece of glass. Everything else in there is glass, but the reflections are just that stripy and irregular because of the manufacturing process. On the right, it's a building in Chicago. We don't even know what we're looking at. We're looking at the inside of the building, the outside of the building, the glass itself, and birds are trying to navigate this at full speed while being super tiny, and it's not a safe combination for them at all. And then in the 80s, low emissivity coatings really improved in quality, and so now you have perfectly mirrored finishes on these windows that we can't actually see. We think we can because we understand the context of like framing around the glass, but birds certainly can't tell. Oh, and wrong direction. Okay, so yeah, birds cannot see glass. It's reflections, it's transparency, it's not good. So collisions really only started being researched in the late 70s. And it wasn't until 2009 that a lead credit was added to prevent bird strikes. It just went from being a pilot credit, I think 2 years ago, to an innovation credit And now we're actually in the process of getting changes made for version 5, but we don't know if it's still going to be an innovation credit or not. But the tricky part is, because best practices are updated every few years, it's really hard to have a concrete reference. And deterrent technology, yes? Oh, so LEED is a construction standard for architecture, leadership in energy, and environmental design. Yes, that one. So yeah, it's a green standard that a lot of buildings will use to have, some tangible symbol of their commitment to environmental awareness. There's like silver, gold, and platinum are the popular tiers, and we're gonna get into legislation, but yeah, some buildings that aren't actually trying to get a LEED score will still reference LEED materials as kind of like a guidepost in which direction they should be going for their construction. So many rabbit holes to go down. But yeah, different technologies to prevent bird strikes come out every couple of years. I have some samples in the back of a couple of different products. And yeah, new products are released every few months. And that's everything from your little stickers that you can order on Amazon to different markers. It's a really fast-changing sector. And down here at the bottom, working groups are gaining traction. There used to be like one working group in New York that nobody knew about, but now we've got groups popping up all over the country, and we're actually talking to each other, which is very exciting. And also, Dr. Clem, who founded the entire field of bird collision research, has published a book. Highly suggest. I would maybe skip to the last couple chapters unless you really want good bedtime reading, though. Anyway, yeah, so historically, people thought that birds were sick. They're just going to the buildings and dying because they know that people can help them or something. We thought they were young because, they're not scared. They're just hanging out next to a window, or they've never seen a building before. Or they're dumb. There's like so many misconceptions around birds hitting windows. And please, if you're on Nextdoor or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Blue Sky or Threads or like all of those things, if you see someone handling a bird, just add a note that's like, hey, you can find a wildlife rehabber in your area. If this bird is not acting normal, do that. So people are gradually catching on that like maybe we shouldn't be handling concussed birds. Also, bird flu is helping people like realize that if they see a bird on the ground, they should maybe not like stick it in their face. Yeah. So as humans, we tend to understand glass as a thing that we vertically interact with on a vertical basis. But unfortunately, birds have to go fast enough to stay in the air, and they only have a split second to make a decision in which direction they're going. So this is more similar to what a bird is actually experiencing. Thankfully, there are tons of researchers now, and if you ask people who study collisions why collisions happen, you will get 20 different answers, which is kind of strange. But we've got folks who spend a lot of time researching migration. There are a lot of groups that only do collision monitoring during migration. There are a lot of folks who only study bird collisions as a nocturnal / early morning situation as a byproduct of light pollution. The original collision studies were based on feeder birds. So if you've got bird feeders, your collisions are happening in very different ways than specifically during migration or due to nocturnal light pollution. But all of these things are accurate. But if you read a paper, it's only going to give generally one very narrow description and perspective with footnotes that back it up. So it's all of the above in different ways, and nobody is wrong. It's just there's a lot of, again, rabbit hole to go down with this. So this is the Ypsilanti District Library. This was my lunch break on, I think, September 16th of 2015. By the time I made it back to the car, I picked up 2 more hummingbirds. That was all like that day's fresh stuff. And one thing I hear from people a lot is, well, if these aren't even my birds, then why do I care? Pretty much everything in this picture, with the exception of the robin and the hummingbird, were on their way to Central and South America. What do we get in Central and South America? Our coffee. Every single one of these critters has been documented on coffee farms eating coffee bean borer beetles, because they couldn't pick a worse name for it. So yeah, this is a much larger picture that we're mostly missing, just because there's ground cover, so we're not. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Point is, we really need to break down what we think or have assumed that collisions are, and understand that it's not just skyscrapers. In fact, high-rises, because there are very few high-rises as well, are responsible for a very small percentage of collisions in general. Like across this entire range of low-rise, non-residential, residential, and high-rise, the average, again, across all of them, is still between 20 and 30 birds per year. And there is an asterisk on this because that's 20 and 30 birds per year that we know of. Some recent studies have indicated that for every bird that we find, there are 5 to 8 that we don't. And survival stats on birds that fly away, at best, is about 40%. So these numbers add up really quickly. Okay, so this is when we get audience participation time. Y'all get to guess how many dead birds are in the picture. It's not double digits, I promise. One person has the right answer. Ooh, y'all are bird watchers. Most groups can count like 2 of them because there's a very obvious wing. So yeah, unless you're really looking, you're not going to notice anything. And then squirrels, chipmunks, cats, dogs, coyotes, foxes, raccoons, possums, and everything else will get to the rest before you usually find them. So back to that initial note of if you see it on the interwebs, tell them. And this is when you take out your phones. Animal Help Now is both a website and an app. Please put Animal Help Now on your phone, regardless of where you are, ideally in the US. They also do non-bird stuff as well. Fantastic resource. You basically put in your zip code, and whether it's a bird, a small mammal, or whatever, and it pops up with a list of rehabbers in your area. Super, super fantastic. But yeah, you want to take stun birds to rehab immediately. Basically, if a bird is grounded and it's not obviously a baby, grab it and then ask your questions later. Because if it gets away, you can't help it. So a lot of people are like, oh, well, the ones that have died a quick death. Except no. Unfortunately, a lot of the birds we pick up, and you, after a while, can start to figure out how long it took a bird to die, or how alive it was when it hit the ground. The fast broken neck ideal death is really only about 3% of what happens. Blunt trauma is responsible for the rest of it. And with rehab, assuming that you get it in ASAP, They get supplemental oxygen, pain meds, and anti-inflammatory medication, and that gives them the best chance of survival. And that's still, again, about 40%. Before supplemental oxygen was added into the routine, the survival rates were closer to 20 to 25%. So yeah, public perception is changing. We're getting better rehab protocols. We're getting more support and education and fantastic outreach. Historically, there was this assumption that collisions really only mattered to nature centers and skyscrapers, and maybe if someone wanted a lead credit for their building, like that was it. This beautiful mural from Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge shows that if you don't do your windows right the first time, you have full artistic license to fix it later. But we figured out that every single group that you can possibly think of has some stake in bird collision prevention. Yeah, basically tell a friend, tell 5 friends. We can all do something, or put someone else in it who is in a position to do something in a better position to take action. So yeah, back in the day, raptor silhouettes were the go-to option. That came about because of a study back in the day with baby geese who essentially they took sort of a goose-hawk cross-shaped silhouette and a bunch of baby geese, and they moved the cross from one side of the enclosure to the other. And when the long end was going first, that was a goose silhouette, and the geese goslings did fine. They ignored it. But when the long end of the cross was at the tail end of the moving shape, they freaked out. And that is essentially the silhouette of an accipiter. You've got your stubby little hawk wings and a long tail. So they realized that, like, if goslings can react with fear to a cross, then like maybe birds who see that shape on a window will react with fear, except for the part where the shape is not moving. So they don't have the context to say, hey, this shape is moving in a scary direction. So that's where the raptor sticker came from, and it does not work. Nets are also not great. Depending on how they're put up and what kind of net gets used, birds can get tangled and die in them. And that's also a really bad look to have, like, hey, we're preventing birds from striking, and they're just dead and tangled. True story, happened at Cornell. Yeah, so tinted glass also doesn't work. Audio deterrence, not even. People have tried to cut down trees in an attempt to prevent bird strikes, which, I mean, that will change the way birds hit your windows, but please don't do that. And yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that can go into collision prevention, but everything up here has been found to not be universal enough to be suggested as best practices. Except for down there in the corner, the handprint rule has evolved into 2x4 inch spacing, which has evolved into 2x2 inch spacing, which we will dig into momentarily. So again, we've eliminated a lot of things from the repertoire of best practices. All of these things used to be suggested by different organizations, and through trial and unfortunate error, we have learned that they should not be the go-to trusted solutions for collision prevention. And there are some cases with some of these products, like external blinds. Great, especially if they're closed, even better. But yeah, we're learning a lot. So when image formation happens, birds think that they can fly to it or through it. And image formation can be seen through glass, whereas you can sort of see the river back there, or when you've got the crisp reflection, like it means nothing to the bird if it can see one option or the other. They're going to try to go regardless. The good news, though, is we can modify the physical world to take your materials with image formation. That's written as materials, not just glass, because polished stainless steel and polished granite have also been documented to kill birds. So we generally lump things in as glass or things with glass-like properties. Point is, reflections and transparency are hazards that need visual cues, and we can make that happen. But because we need to accommodate like 800 different species in North America, we have to be a little bit careful about how we do that. So we're trying to modify bird behavior. So if we saw a chair in the middle of a road, we would drive around it. But if there's one chair on a window and the bird flies around it, there's still a lot of window for it to hit. So we need to put enough cones to not only change which lane the bird is flying in, but do it in a three-dimensional manner that makes them aware that they don't want to fly between an entire wall of dots, essentially, or stripes. But yeah, 2x4 inch spacing initially was identified because the tests, I keep getting ahead of myself. Birds know their body size, and 2x2 inch spacing is where the sweet spot is right now. I don't think it's going to get smaller than that, but again, best practices are ever evolving. The reason it's now 2x2 is because there are so many hummingbirds that hit glass that 2x4 inch spacing was very obviously not doing the trick for them. They cannot be tested in the existing material tests. So yeah, in California, there's at least one study that found 42% of their strikes were hummingbirds. So if you're not helping 42% of your birds, then maybe reconsider your strategy. But your collision prevention materials need to work in a bunch of different scenarios. So do you have a super bright reflection that you're dealing with? Do you have a very dark one? Do you have a complex woodland of trees with lots of shade? What are you reflecting? And will your material work in whichever situations you have in all of the lighting conditions that you have? You know, super simple questions. So in this case, we have a white ceramic frit that's on the outside of the glass. This photo is from the inside looking out. That has a cool little pattern going on there. So the inhabitants did actually cite visual interest as one of the reasons that they went for it. Ceramic frit is like a ceramic ink that's baked onto the glass. So it provides thermal solar heat reduction. In some cases, it can be used for privacy. Airports love it for glare control. Your employee productivity is improved when they're not getting things smashing against the windows all day, every day. And one thing that I did not expect to hear so much was when you have fewer birds hitting your windows, you don't have as many rats around your building because they don't have a consistent food source. So if anyone's giving you pushback about like not wanting to fix their windows or build a new building that has bird-safe windows, like you're gonna save on your pest control. But yeah, so when I'm talking about surface one, that is where the magic happens. That's where the birds are. That is where whatever product it is has the best chance of being seen and being effective. There are some cases where surface two, if you have the right boldness and color of pattern of material, where it can sometimes work out, but surface 3 and surface 4, the odds are not in your favor. Surface 4, unfortunately, for a lot of places is the only option they have because you can't get to the glass from the outside. But in that case, you have to go really bold, really big, and you still might not get to what you need. So for example, I did add a black and white stripe on each of these sides of the picture. There's a number on the top of the glass that's on the outside, and then the number on the bottom of the glass is on surface 4. So you can see that at certain times of the day, and technically this is all in the evening, I just rotated my angle a smidge. Even though the white is hard to see in the top right corner, you can still see that it's there because it casts its own shadow on the low E coating. But on surface 4, if it's a super bright scene that's being reflected, you can barely make it out. But if you have a black number or deterrent or anything on surface 1, it can still be kind of overpowered by shadows. And if that's on surface 3 or 4, you really don't stand a chance in most situations. But surface 1, across the board with white, is almost always the best option. Again, black, depending on the situation, might be appropriate, but it's usually not going to be the best option. So yeah, if you can't see it, they can't see it, and the higher the contrast, the better it is for everybody. And yeah, back to the white casting its own shadow, that's a factor of the reflection within the glass providing its own like burst of contrast there. So yeah, we've come a long way. We actually understand how different layers of glass are working, how different colors perform. And this is in large part due to Dr. Clem, who's been on this since the late 70s. Dr. Shepard started at the American Bird Conservancy shortly after I started doing collision stuff. Her entire span at ABC has been a really phenomenal combination of growing their collision program and literally branching out. They now have 2 test tunnels, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. So these are some of the tunnels. So collision prevention materials are evaluated using very different test methods. They all have their different strengths and limitations. I'm going to ignore most of the testing things and talk very briefly about tunnel testing. The thing to know, though, and threat factor scores are kind of the basis of LEED's bird collision deterrent credit, so I'm not going to dig too deeply into that. But essentially, ABC is where threat factors are born, but every single test is a simplification of real-world scenarios. They can't factor in absolutely everything, but different test methods show us how different collision scenarios exist. But again, because they're so specific, like if ABC's test is only testing for head-on collisions, that doesn't really tell you what happens for side collisions. Not that birds are hitting sideways, but like there are very different scenarios. And in a tunnel, you have a very artificial, like birds generally do not fly down tunnels and then see a building at the end of that. So they're generally testing really a product-to-product comparison, not necessarily a real-world efficacy comparison, which gets complicated and is why threat factor scores are not the whole picture. But, anywho, because interest in collisions is growing so quickly, and you can see that seasonal spike every time we have a season of birds hitting windows, interest keeps going up. And then we have a huge spike there in 2020. Can anyone tell me what happened in 2020? Everyone was suddenly home and found out that their windows were getting hit by birds. So that was the huge, huge spike. And then I'm fairly certain that the spike in 2023 was because New York City passed their bird safe building code. And along with this, so we couldn't pass codes before we knew what would actually work. So it's kind of been a chicken and an egg thing because nobody wants to pass a code if you don't have products, but you don't want to have products if there's no demand. And so we're finally getting enough traction that we're actually seeing bird-safe building ordinances popping up all over, right now, the continent. The American Bird Conservancy Code does suggest 100% of all buildings or structures be made 100% bird-friendly for the first 100 feet. It gets complicated, though. Essentially, Oh no, did I? Oh no, that slide's gone. Essentially, when we provide design guidelines, there's limited information from the demand side that is happening. So essentially, builders want to build a code, architects want to build a code, clients want to pay no more than they absolutely have to. So there are all these weird pressures influencing code and, to some extent, products that may or may not have anything to do with bird collisions or their efficacy. But when you don't have codes addressing something, like on the right, there's this railing that has blue painter's tape all over it, they had opted to not use a bird-safe product on that railing. And in the first couple of months that the building was open, folks on campus took it into their own hands and just taped the ever-living hell out of it because they couldn't figure out what else to do to stop the birds from hitting. On the left, they did it right. They used a product that had adequate spacing, adequate contrast, and obviously got a much more subtle, shall we say, appearance. Saves you time and money to do it right, and you have more aesthetic control. But yeah, within 6 months, the railing on the right had to be redone. Indoor plants are a huge risk factor. Plants are food, they're shelter, you have to conceal them, or at least provide enough dots that the birds will need to fly around them. So atriums, railings, all of this stuff, it just provides that transparency that birds will, it's like toddler-proofing a building, except your toddlers are 2 inches big. So structural traps. Eastern Michigan has, I don't remember the name of the building, but it's shaped like an E. And those little nooks and crannies, just birds get trapped in there. They don't know which way is out. Hummingbirds can go straight up, but nobody else can. So you have to really work on reducing reflections or hopefully not building your building in that shape to begin with to make sure that you're not trapping birds. And yes, there's a dead bird in every picture, but I'm not gonna circle them. Okay, silhouettes. This goes back to why things don't work. Would anyone like to guess how many stickers there are on this window? The Post-it notes are actual feather prints of strikes, but yeah. But for the actual stickers that are intended to prevent strikes, close. The spider web in the right corner, yeah. And all of those Post-it notes are actual, and most strikes don't leave any marks at all. So for this window to have that many smudges, this was Juliet, the purple finch that we picked up there. So that was super sad. So yeah, silhouettes, again, they don't work unless you use a ton of them. But you can also use tiny dots. And shout out to the Superior Township Library. If y'all want to do a field trip over there, 100% of their glass is bird friendly. It is on the outside surface, and they used acid etch dots. The beautiful thing about acid etch is when you have a bright color, you generally have dark dots. It's exciting. The light play when you've got that refraction is just, it's so fun, because then you look at your darker areas and the dots look light. Like, it's so exciting. The downside, though, is when you have too much of a homogeneous background, like in that medium gray lower left, or in a super busy, distracted, complicated background, the dots will kind of blend in as well there. But overall, super fun pattern. And fun fact, in March of this year, I was actually hired by a glass company to be their in-house technical advisor on bird-friendly glass. And this is actually one of their projects. So even though I consulted on it a couple of years ago, like, at least I know that they trust my judgment. Yeah, so go to the library and tell them how much you love the dots. If you're looking at UV products, there are a lot of things that you need to consider. This is the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge Visitor Center. I'm sure I missed a couple names on that building, but as much as it's a super cool technology, you really need to consider what surface number that material is on, how big is the pattern, how widely spaced is the pattern, and lots and lots and lots of other things. Because if you can't see it from 10 to 15 feet away, birds are going to have a hard time seeing it with enough time to redirect. So within 2 years, the visitor center had added a Surface One retrofit product, feather friendly, which I do have some demo samples if you want to look at it in person. But yeah, like, they put it on Surface 3, which is like the worst of the surfaces that you can put UV on because it needs as much contrast and not battling with the Surface 1 reflections as possible. Anyway, so American Bird Conservancy bird tape is an exciting option that you can use as well. Again, spacing is your only limitation. I do have a sample of that in the back too. Feather friendly. From the inside, you really, if you're looking at the trees, you don't see it at all. If you're looking at the sky, like, yeah, there's some black dots. From the outside looking in, you still get to keep most of your aesthetics. It just has some dots. And I absolutely adore this photo because it was a random group of school kids that had asked their teacher, like, why are birds hitting the window? And their teacher was like, wait, I know someone, because her brother's roommate was in the dorm next to mine on campus in Illinois in 2003, that one time. So, like, so a bunch of school kids in South Korea fixed a window because, like, I knew a guy. Yeah. And there's a bunch of other photos from this series that I should have put in here, but they put them up on Halloween, so it's like all these kids in like Mario costumes and stuff, just like putting tape on the windows. I love it. And then Kaleidoscape. As much as I love the fact that from the inside looking out, it does kind of give you that screen effect, I have since revised my general endorsement of it just because the durability is not what it should be. I was just in Denver in early October, and they had put up, which do not ever use clear, any of the clear products. Kaleidoscape clear, don't do it. But they had put up Kaleidoscape clear on a wildlife refuge, and in their case, it worked great because it's such a dusty sky in Denver that just all of the crevices were caked in dirt, and it had only been up for a month. So that's going to need to be replaced pretty darn quickly. So yeah, perforated products, they just have a really limited lifespan. I think their warranty might be 3 years. For feather friendly, because it's not perforated, their warranty is like 6 years. Anyway, Solix, super cool aesthetics, also not a super great lifespan. I want to say their warranty is also in the 3-year range, but they do tend to get replaced like every 5-ish years. Feather friendly is like 15 to 20. So, but this covers your entire window, so it's not just the stripes that are on there. Acopian bird savers, for folks who don't want to put anything on the glass, this is a nice hack. You probably do want to put the cords every 3 inches, and I say 3 because at 4 inches, you might still occasionally get a strike. At 3 inches, because this is on the outside, it kind of like reflects itself, so unless you've got a case where transmission, transparency, things are seeing through, most places are dealing with reflection, so you have like twice the cords because you've got the reflection working in your favor as well. Not super easy to see in this shot, but it's just nylon paracord, and you can DIY it or order stuff. And then if you move, you can just take them off the hooks and carry on, and you don't have to do anything about the glass. Solar shades are fantastic. You get privacy, energy efficiency. Your HOA may or may not approve, but it's super effective when in use. External shading that is not just a rolling shade can also be super helpful. Again, when it's in use, obviously the rolling shutters might be a bit overkill if you plan on being home. But again, in this case, it's the dense spacing that's helping you out. And then my favorite option, which I have messaged the ride about their shelters, and I do not in any way, shape, or form endorse or condone graffiti, but you know, drawing on your own windows is a fantastic option. From the inside looking out, there's hardly any visual distraction there. We've got the before and after on the right from the outside. It's a great project for kids because you can do whatever you want. And then you can wipe it off and redo it if you want. I do suggest folks Google Bird Friendly London's durability test of markers applied on windows. It's a really rigorous breakdown of which markers performed how and in what ways. Just like Carrie, where did Carrie go? Hiding in the back there. Carrie has done her windows with white stripes, and I don't think any touch-ups have been made, and that was like 2018? Yeah, okay, 2018. So it's been a while, and that's Michigan summers and winters with no stripe touch-ups. So again, if you cannot do the outside at all, one of my friends in Detroit decided that every single seasonal sticker that went on discount was going to be purchased. So yeah, after every holiday, stock up in bulk, let the kids go nuts. Again, spacing, contrast makes it a beautiful situation there. I think this is the Packard Health building in Ipsy that has this mural on the right. They could have done it on the outside of the building, but they weren't doing this for bird collision reduction. They were just doing it for window art. But yeah, again, bold, contrasty. But again, you can see that only where the background is dark are you really getting that pop. Where it's a bright reflection, you know, you're still seeing more clouds than paint. So birds would still be hitting those areas depending on which angle the birds are approaching from. Ipsy District Library. Apparently, it's really distracting when birds hit windows in the kids section. So every year they've done a different Post-it note mural. And from some angles, you can see the Post-it notes, but from other angles, you kind of see more branches than Pikachu. So if you do a Post-it note situation, I would go with an actual checkerboard pattern rather than trying to make something a cohesive piece of art. And then back to EMU. This building has so much brick on it, and everyone's like, oh, brick buildings are fine. No, they're not. It has very small windows, but unfortunately, they look like perfect little shortcuts between the buildings. So if people are talking about how their windows are safe for some reason, like unless there's screen on the outside, or unless there are very strategically placed mud splatters every 2 inches, it's probably not actually safe. Just because you don't know that things are hitting doesn't mean they're not. So yeah, one of my highlights in life is having to tell people that like this building actually does kill quite a few birds every year. It's just they're concentrated. So yeah, when you have funneling landscape features or masonry features or any of those, also Again, landscaping is a risk factor, but don't assume that cutting things down is going to be a preventative solution. This one is in Southfield, I believe. The first time I drove past it, I thought it was a soccer net. Yeah. I don't go to Southfield during the months of September or October because I will stop and I will walk around the buildings. Anyway, let's move on to light. So across the board, dark sky lighting is your friend. I am a fan of moths and lightning bugs and bats and other nocturnal creatures. So it's not just for birds. I'm also a fan of human health and a normal circadian rhythm. But yeah, lighting is only really necessary in fairly limited quantities and qualities. So if you can curate the light around you, it does a lot to help everything. I will let y'all go down the dark sky rabbit hole on your own, but basically, too much light is the worst. The best thing you can do is have dim light that's a warm color, that's pointing down, well, down, where it's needed, and follow those practices year-round, because migration does not just exist between March 15th and the end of May, and then August 15th to the middle of November. But also, why are we talking about bird migration when lightning bugs need to find a mate all summer and we're just like crashing their party over there? But yeah, it's a win-win, because with less energy being used, that's a lower carbon emission. It's better for your wallet. Tell your friend, tell your boss, tell every building in your neighborhood. There is also a local dark sky group that is fantastic, and I would totally suggest getting involved with. Yeah, I thought I took this one out. Yeah, it's also good for your neighbors. So there are a lot of numbers floating around about light reduction and collision reduction. If you turn off your lights, it will not solve your collision problem, because 99% of collisions happen during the day. However, if you are the Post Tower in Bonn, Germany, or McCormick Center in Chicago, turning off your lights can reduce collisions significantly, because the bulk of your collisions are happening pre-dawn. So they generally need to be separated when you're addressing collisions and light or light-based collisions. October, how many of y'all heard about McCormick Place last year? Okay, so October 5th, I still have a couple minutes. I was driving to Chicago to give a talk to a bunch of architects on October 6th. And this kid that I chaperoned on his first birding trip to Texas started texting me all of these photos of just tables of dead birds. The thing is, he is now an employee at the Field Museum, and he's like not really on social media. So I started sharing his posts, and it got traction. This whole incident thankfully did prompt McCormick Place, after 42 years of killing 800 to 1,000 birds a year, change their windows. By change, I mean added feather friendly. That is disturbing that it took 42 years of everyone being like, hey, there's a problem. How about now? There's still a problem. 42 years. So October 6th, this is a photo from my hotel room at West Wolf Point, maybe. The green dots are birds that I saw that were alive and acting normal. Red dots are dead things and or strikes that I saw. Yellow dots were injured birds. And this scene, if you talk to folks at that building, you're like, a dozen birds a day is normal for them during migration. And this plays out everywhere in Chicago all season long. So we have to really rethink the way our urban spaces are being developed, because I don't know how any birds get through Chicago unconcussed. Geographically, Chicago is at a pinch point, so things are much more severe there, or at least visibly severe there than most other places. Cleveland has the same kind of geographic funnel, but we really need to figure out better ways to bird-proof our communities. And apparently that building in the middle had the option to go with bird-friendly glass, but they opted not to because Chicago's standards are voluntary. So they do have bird-friendly building codes, but they're voluntary. So, suggested reading. The Bird-Friendly City is fantastic. Why Birds Matter will get you so many more facts than you ever thought you needed to talk to friends and family at Thanksgiving about how much work birds do for us in the ecosystem. 101 Ways to Help Birds. The collision chapter, it's from 2006, so the collision chapter is a hair dated, but it is a really wonderful book and a great gift for folks because it breaks down your daily habits into things that can be slightly tweaked to be better for birds. And if you do want to report dead birds that you find, Bird Mapper and D-Bird are for specifically window collisions, and then iNaturalist is for window collisions, roadkill, power line kills, fence kills, cat kills, or live ones. They do that too. Again, Animal Help Now is fantastic for survivors. It does also have a sheet on collision prevention as well. They do have some fact pages that are neat. Tell a friend. And then to answer the question that was prompted at the very beginning, you are a human if you have identified all of these lovely squares as being ones that birds would try to fly through. I think that is it for me for now, and it's 6:57. What kind of questions can I answer? And I would like to acknowledge Deb for being the best collision monitor that EMU has ever had, and the IPSI library.
Right, okay. So you monitored the IPSI library well ahead of me and took the stats to the board quite frequently.
I went to every single library board meeting for a year to read out a list of what I'd picked up.
And the end result was the Superior Library, when they built the library, they put in bird-safe glass because of the work Heidi did.
Mm-hmm. I think the moral of the story is pick a library and go to every single one of their meetings and tell them about all the dead birds you've been finding, regardless of whether or not it's at their building. Maybe they'll post info. Post info about how to prevent collisions. There is technically a sustainability commission for the city of Ann Arbor that has been thinking about a collision prevention, bird-safe building code type thing.
Yeah, the Office of Sustainability and Innovations is one of the departments in the city of Ann Arbor. Yeah.
Have y'all been working with Rita? Or are there two separate? Okay, cool. I don't know how much we're allowed to say or not say because city library.
Yeah, I work for NAP, and we both are part of the city, but we aren't always collaborating with the Office of Sustainability and Innovation.
So last year, Detroit actually had a proposal for a bird-safe building guideline code ordinance legislation. But because it was deemed to be different than / in opposition to the state building code. It never even made it to the city council for a vote. One of my big goals in life is to get the Detroit folks and maybe the Ann Arbor folks together with, I don't know, the Lansing folks and do a statewide one, because like, if you're gonna bite off more than you can chew, you might as well like bite off a lot more than you can chew. Yes. I mean, that is one of my hopes, yes. Let's.
They're the CSI, Construction Specifications Institute. They have a Detroit chapter. They'll be having a conference in March. They invited me to speak, but I'm not available. I might just drop them your name.
When in March?
I don't remember the exact date and time. I'll get it for you. In Detroit,
Thank you.
so it's local.
I'm just gonna block off the entire month.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, Canada did a really beautiful thing. The other, well, it's a CSA up there, the Canadian Standard something. In 2019, they passed. It's so weird though. It's like the National Construction Guideline, but different places can adopt those standards at different times. So kind of like in the US, we have different energy codes, but like some states just haven't adopted energy codes, or they have decided to adopt like the 2010 version. So yeah, adoption of things is always kind of iffy, and a lot of the codes that pass just have way too many loopholes. So like Alameda, California, if your building is 32 feet or shorter, you don't have to do anything about your glass. It's not really how it works, but okay. I think the San Francisco code says that if you're within 300 feet of a wetland or a park that is more than 2 acres, only the side that's facing that area, if it is more than 50% glass, needs to be made bird safe. It's like, cool, you could do 48% and you're fine. We have our work cut out for us.
Other questions? Hold on, Gary, I'm coming.
I was going to ask about this building, but I guess I should not. Building right there.
Oh, Carrie's,
We're going to do a workshop where we're going to I'll buy the tape. Everybody come, and we will cover these windows. The ones we can reach from the ground.
Yeah,
It's
go ahead.
So this year was the first time I found any dead birds, and of the 3 that I found, 2 of them were juvenile. So I wonder if there's any sort of just natural selection occurring with some anthropogenic influence, or if there is like age discrepancy in what you observe.
Okay, so there are a bunch of, I'm gonna say theories on that. Historically, people have kept like victim blaming the baby birds because like, oh, it's a baby. It's never done a migration before. It's never seen buildings before. The problem with that is adult birds hit too. And Andy Jones from the Cleveland Museum of Natural History last fall at the American Ornithological Society had a lovely presentation, but there's no publication, so I can't actually cite it. But he and the Lake Erie Science and Nature Center have done a phenomenal piece of research. Essentially, they looked at weight and age, mostly of white-throated sparrows in the case that they presented. But the theory there was because skull ossification is not complete with juvenile birds, so like the calcium hasn't fully formed yet. When they hit, they have, it's bad. They don't, So essentially, adults have a slightly better chance of surviving because their skulls are a little more calcified. What absolutely destroyed my soul, though, so fat birds are healthy birds. Fat birds are the ones that are more likely to survive migration. Fat birds have more weight when they hit glass. So what they found across the board was that, yes, juvenile birds are more likely to die when they hit, but the heavier birds are also more likely to die. So if you have a scraggly, lightweight adult white-throated sparrow, it might not make it through migration, but it's more likely to survive a collision. So, like, if anything, this is really badly reversed evolution. Yeah, so, when I pieced that together, I lost sleep for a while. Also, the spring and fall migration thing, they're like, oh, fewer birds die in spring. Like, the bird population pie is a smaller pie because everything that made it through migration, and I mean, I used to work on a wind farm, so I'm just not gonna talk about cats or wind turbines. We're just gonna talk about literally everything else kills creatures between the boreal forest and the Amazon and back. So the things that have made it back to breed, it's a pretty actually small chunk of what started out last fall. And so when birds are hitting windows in spring, it's just a smaller pie that's hitting the same percentage in fall, because hopefully they've all had like 3 to 5 babies and hopefully they all lived. It's a much larger pie that we take slices from and throw against windows.
Thanks, Heidi. I had a question. I remember the FLAP program, Fatal Light
Fatal Light
Awareness
Awareness.
Program in Toronto.
Yeah.
I was in Toronto one October, staying in a high-rise downtown hotel. And when we came out in the morning, there were dead birds all over the sidewalk. Would you say that area is similar to Chicago in terms of the high-rise kills versus other places like here where more birds are hitting low-rise buildings?
Yeah, Toronto also has a bit of that geographic funnel of the lake as well. So Michael Mijur is the founder of FLAP. He is a fantastic and wonderful human, and we need to clone him. He, in the last couple of years, has started talking about how he regrets calling it Fatal Light Awareness Program because people get hung up on that light part. So Toronto passed their bird safe building standard in 2008, I believe. It was the first actual city to do something about it in North America. But they've done a really good job of keeping up with the best practices. Most cities in Canada have based their guidelines on the Toronto guidelines. CSA was kind of a combination of Toronto's guidelines and a lot of input from other researchers. They've done a phenomenal job with all of that. But what's really strange and wonderful to me is they've gotten really creative about legal action. There was a lawsuit against, there's some really bad buildings in Toronto. So there was a lawsuit that was trying to basically just hold them accountable for, fixing their building would be nice. They were able to argue that the reflected light from the building, just the reflections on the building, which, light is what causes reflections to happen, was a form of pollution. So legally, that is a light pollution case, even though it's birds hitting windows that was the root of the lawsuit. I know they are also looking into nuisance pest, city code municipal type, in Toronto, you're not allowed to store your waste in ways that attract rodents. They're trying to narrow down the wording of their next lawsuit to identify, what section exactly. Are they banning the improper storage of waste, or are they banning the attraction of rodents? Because if you can point out that somebody's violating code by attracting rodents by having dead birds everywhere, So thinking outside the box is a beautiful thing, and FLAP is really good at it.
Thanks, Heidi. Other questions?
I was curious. You mentioned the fact that the dust deposits in Denver kind of created a bit of a life cycle problem for the dust that were used on the exterior of the windows. You've done a fair amount of work in California. I was curious, has there been any research done on the extent to which wildfire soot deposits might actually be decreasing window strikes in impacted areas on the West Coast?
So the short answer is I doubt anything has been done on that. The long answer is dirty windows are not effective at preventing strikes. The longer answer is we know that air quality and bird deaths are pretty closely linked. There have been a couple very significant bird die-offs in the last couple of years. Some of the deaths, we weren't entirely sure what to attribute them to, but when you have a decrease of strikes from one season to the next, and air quality is a factor, it's more likely to be that than the actual soot on the windows, unfortunately.
Other questions?
I was wondering if there was like any way I could like help stop sorry help stop like bird collisions on the windows at my school, because it has a lot of windows.
Yes, the short answer is yes. We should talk after this, because I know there are a couple schools that have collision issues, and I'm sure there are plenty that don't know that they have collision issues. Usually the best way to go about it is to talk to art teachers and get them on board. If there's anyone who is like a sustainability person for the school, usually they are focused on like recycling and water use reduction, but they might also be a good person to loop in. And by the time you have buy-in from the art people and the sustainability people, maybe hopefully some science people, it opens a lot of doors. And if it's proposed as like a student design competition or a collaborative mural situation, there's a lot of room. Well, I mean, you saw some of the window art. Yeah, schools are a fantastic place to start with this as well, because the education at that level, especially if your windows are celebrating the wildlife or biodiversity in the area, it can go a long way in educating folks that they can then take home and tell to their parents. So, high fives, go team.
Excellent, thanks Heidi.
Oh, we've got 2 more questions. After these 2, I'll tell you about the surprise in the back corner.
You had the one graph that made it look like there was an increase in the number of bird strikes with passage of time, although you explained a couple of reasons why there might have been spikes.
I
I
think
just wonder
that's-
if there are any correlating variables of like land cover or the environment, so that if window treatment isn't an option, that there are like other things that could be tended to, adding plants in the landscape, or I don't know, like adjacencies or something.
So I think the reason things are getting Googled with increasing frequency is just the general awareness of the words to search, because at least those terms were just bird window. I'm not sure how much of that is from newer houses having bigger, better windows, how much of that is folks building further out in better habitat. As for the second part of your question, I'm not entirely sure that I caught that. Are you asking about just what landscaping type things you can do to?
Or if you've seen, like, if there's an increase in bird strikes in one area, if that's correlated with any specific variables. If it's like, if the new development has no tree cover, or
Could
if
be
it's
a
next to
lot
open
of
water,
things.
that kind of thing.
It could be a lot of things. There are folks who will design an entire building based on like, oh, there's a woodland on one side of it. If something happens to that and it changes the flow of birds around the building itself. You also get a lot of seasonal variation. My first year in Illinois that I was picking things up, it was a ton of birds. The second year, they slapped like half a dozen hawk stickers on their library and then started high-fiving everyone because they were getting like a quarter of the strikes that they had gotten the previous year. But all of the other buildings on campus also saw that decrease. So it was just migration had shifted a bit that year. So yeah, there's also a campus in Kansas City that fixed the one really bad window, and then the next year all the birds were hitting the window next to it. So they fixed that one, and then like the birds just, like, when you're redirecting them, they gotta go somewhere, so you kind of have to fix the entire area that they might hit. So yeah, and there was one more question in the back, and then after this, we'll turn it over to Alex.
I'm sure you already addressed this. I'm just going to ask it anyways. Have you looked at, this is indirectly related to the earlier question, but I'm just out of curiosity, have you looked at correlation between build-up of buildings in a local area and increase in frequency of bird strikes, and compare that with seasonal fluctuations? So I'm just guessing that, bird strikes are more common in summer versus winter and so on, as well as migration patterns in and out of that area. I'm sure you've looked at that, but I'm just curious, the big picture, how does it look like? As a place become more populated by humans, do we get more bird strikes over the past decade? And is it possible that changes in bird population is correlated with bird strike frequency?
So the short answer is yes. The sad answer is bird collision numbers are going to keep going down as long as bird population numbers are going down, simply because we're running out of birds to kill. That said, though, if you look at the year-round statistics, so in Illinois, I was monitoring year-round. For Michigan, I pretty much try to monitor when the ground is visible, except lately, on the advice of my therapist, I've kind of been stepping back from monitoring a bit. But yeah, the numbers are really, and of course it's not in this presentation, it's in another one that covers the stats on the IPSI library. Winter is pretty slow. Spring, I want to say we got like 23 species of birds, and the spring numbers and summer numbers of the year that I was monitoring basically daily, the numbers were fairly similar, but the diversity was very different. I think that summer we ended up with 17 or 18 species, but there was only overlap in 2 of them between spring and summer. So huge diversity in both seasons, hardly any overlap. And then fall, you get a huge spike in both diversity and number. As far as like actual human developments and how that changes numbers of strikes, and like I don't know how much information is going to be available on that scale because there's so few people researching. But it's a really interesting and challenging question. My goal in general is to just fix all of the buildings so we don't have to ask those questions. But yes, essentially bird populations are just hurting so badly that like sometimes I'm happy when we get strikes because at least like there's enough birds to be hitting. Because when you get a year that has no strikes, you start freaking out. Because in my world, if there's no birds hitting, there are no birds because they've all died. Because when birds are hitting, like at least there's birds that are alive somewhere moving through the area. Again, my therapist is amazing and does not get paid enough. Yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question very well, but I'm not sure that there is a good answer for it. But yeah, Juliet, I don't know if you'd like to hand it over to Alex or if I shall.
Do we have a surprise from Alex?
We do have a surprise. I convinced Alex to bring his light box if anyone wants to take photos of this fall's window collisions from Eastern Michigan and the Ypsi District Library.
Oh, so are
Yeah.
you coming up, Alex, or are we
No,
doing it?
we've
we're
got
gonna
it
do
set up in
back
the
there?
back corner. He
In the
just needs
corner.
to flip the switch to turn the lights on. You don't have to touch anything if you don't want to. You can touch things if you want to. I forgot to bring gloves, so like, don't lick anything.
So why doesn't everybody that's interested meet in the at the light box with Alex, Heidi's partner?
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Heidi.
Thank y'all for being good sports.